why it was July and not lying that toppled Boris Johnson, and what that means for Liz Truss and Rishi Sunak. My name's Mike Cashman, the channel is Britannia Waves the Rules. If you find the videos useful, please like, subscribe and share. So why do I say that it was July that toppled Boris Johnson, not lying? The purported reason for many of the resignations was the intolerable level of lying, finally about Pincher and his past conduct and the lies about what Boris Johnson knew about it. But actually, if you look back at the previous lies, that wasn't arguably worse than many of the others. There were no parties when Johnson himself had been to parties. The scandal over Owen Paterson, effectively trying to, although it was presented differently, trying to cover up the blatant lobbying for Randox that was paying Owen Paterson. And I know there's the straw that breaks the camel's back argument, but honestly, Johnson could have blustered his way through this based on what he had done previously, if it wasn't for the fact that it was July. Now, there are those who say, well, it was down to the cumulative effect on the opinion polls. But followers of this channel may know that I have long predicted that Boris Johnson would be toppled in mid-term during this Parliament. Why do I say that? The Tories, more often than not, end up with a new leader partway through their Parliament. There are exceptional cases in which that doesn't happen. Margaret Thatcher after the Falklands, John Major, who did face a challenge and faced it off, David Cameron during the coalition government. That was a kind of special case. He hadn't won a majority, and if you toppled Cameron, would the coalition have fallen apart? But typically the Tories topple their candidates or end up with a new leader one way or another partway through a parliament, even when they've won, or that happens more often than not anyway. And it was likely to happen with Boris Johnson because there are loads of people in the Conservative Party who would like to be leader and Prime Minister. We see this each time there's a leadership election. All sorts of folk come out of the woodwork, some that you've never heard of before, some who have very little chance of becoming leader, but nonetheless they pursue their delusion or publicity attempt or whatever it is. So plenty of people want to be Conservative Party leader. Now, if you, for example, have some realistic chance of becoming Conservative Party leader, if you're in the cabinet, for example, and you're looking forward to the next election in 2024, for example, there are two things that could happen there that would be really bad for your chances of becoming party leader. One is Boris Johnson, in charge of the Conservatives at that point, losing that election. Conservatives might then be out of power for 5 years. You're looking at 2030 or so before the next election. You might be too old then. The other thing that's really bad for your chances of becoming Conservative Party leader are Boris Johnson leading the Conservatives into the 2024 election and winning, because then he's achieved the unusual feat of winning 2 majorities. That doesn't happen very often. Margaret Thatcher, who else? Actually, for Labour, Attlee and Wilson and Blair. But if Boris Johnson had achieved that unusual feat, then his position would be that much stronger and your chances of becoming party leader would be that much weaker. So there are plenty of people who wanted to depose Boris Johnson. Now, when would they want to do it? See, I've long argued that early in this Parliament would have been a bad time because there was all the negative impact of Brexit due to come. Much better, if we're thinking back to 2019, early 2020, much better to leave Boris Johnson in office in order to cop that impact and have to explain it. On the other hand, if you want to depose Boris Johnson, you don't want to leave it until just before the next election because you haven't then had a chance to prove yourself. So midterm is about right, 2022, say. And within 2022, what's the best time to depose Boris Johnson? Well, actually, the beginning of July is a perfect time because it just allows time for Tory MP votes to end up with the 2 candidates who can then campaign over the summer when there's less attention from political programmes, the Pestons, Question Times, and so on. Fewer duties in Parliament, you can get around the country, you can have the hustings, and then the new leader can have a coronation at the Tory Party conference in the autumn. So the ideal time was actually just at the beginning of July. And that's what I'd said the likely timing was. I suppose if I was a betting man, I should have put some money on it. Feel free to take note of whatever tips I give you for the future. So Javid and Sunak resigned on a Tuesday early in July. We are told that that was not synchronised at all. There was a wave of resignations subsequently. I would be very surprised if it was not the case that a number of those were pre-arranged with people such as Sunak, Javid, or anybody else who wanted to make a leadership attempt, and some of them were genuine responses to the situation. Either way, Sunak and Javid chose the moment at which to depose Boris Johnson, and it was the perfect moment for them. I happen to believe that that is not coincidence. Sunak gave a couple of reasons, disagreements over economic policy, and he also felt enough was enough in terms of the integrity issue. When people give two reasons for something, it's because they don't believe that either of them is enough on its own. Sorry I'm late, there was heavy traffic on the motorway, and I ran out of petrol and there was a big queue at the petrol station. See, neither excuse is enough on its own. So Sunak's resignation is interesting because he is saying, well, there was a question about integrity, but it wasn't just that. In other words, that wasn't enough on its own. I wouldn't have resigned just for that. There was also a disagreement about economic policy, but that wasn't enough on its own. I wouldn't have resigned just for that. Because if one of them had been enough on its own, that's what he would have mentioned on its own in the resignation letter. So Sunak and Truss are now in a difficult situation because they are both ready to stand as leader. Now, I've said before, a new Tory Prime Minister, well, any new Prime Minister wants to make their mark, wants to be thought of as doing something different. But this is not a 1989 situation. Sorry, it was 1990 in the end, with the depose of Margaret Thatcher. This is not a situation where there's one specific policy that is so unpopular that people are marching on the streets and are saying, we will not tolerate this. And the new candidates for Tory leader can say, that's okay, we are going to propose a change. In that case, for the poll tax. Michael Heseltine claimed credit for having been the first to say so, but credit for the first doesn't necessarily count in the leadership stakes. The thing is that John Major and Douglas Hurd, who was also competing for the leadership, had got a clear policy difference to declare. Now, Sunak and Truss are attempting to do that. Truss is promising some tax cuts. This morning she promised some levelling down of wages, so she offered to the electorate, we're going to take a lot of wages lower than they were before, and then tick, 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 somebody realised, partly based on the feedback, that that actually wouldn't be enormously popular, and so that got turned around. But this struggling for differentiation is fake. It's not because there's a substantial difference from Boris Johnson. What can they say that their difference is? They can say it's not July. That's true. They can say they're the new leader, and so you can't depose me straight away. But they haven't got a very solid base for support. Now, loads of people, loads of Tory ministers are declaring, particularly Liz Truss is the best candidate. That means nothing. This is a bandwagon. This is people who want to be in Liz Truss's government. Oh, I supported you all along. Well, no, you didn't actually, but fairly late in the process, you said that you would support me. And they're hoping that they're going to get cabinet jobs because of this. Or that's what I believe the motivation is. And, you know, if you think that you can do some good in cabinet, then fair enough. I suppose then that's a reasonable action to take. But it's not something that says that Liz Truss is a great candidate to back. I think the whole uncertainty that we've seen amongst the Tories as to whether to back Truss or Sunak, or maybe we don't want either of them, maybe we want Boris Johnson, is an indication of the confusion that the Conservative Party finds itself in, for which it will suffer at the next general election. That's what I believe. Please feel free to share your views. My name's Mike Cashman. Channel is Britannia Waves the Rules. We support the National Rejoin the EU march. Thank you.